So it was a moment of restrained triumphalism for the Chancellor. George Osborne's autumn statement to MPs offered the prospect of a brighter future, with growth revised upwards over the next 2 years, while borrowing and unemployment are both predicted to fall. But George Osborne was careful to stress that the job was not done, outlining a new round of £3 billion of Whitehall spending cuts over the next 3 years. There were few policy announcements, but with improved life expectancy, he set out plans for a rise in the pension age to 68 by the mid-2030s and 69 by the late 2040s. Welfare spending will be capped, though pensions will be exempted. Business rates in England and Wales will be capped at 2%, with some retailers receiving a £1,000 discount. And a planned rise in fuel duty of 2p per litre next year will be scrapped. In a moment, our economics editor will be crunching the figures, but first, our political editor, Gary Gibbon, reports on the Chancellor's statement.
I reckon he's on his way in.
The Chancellor hopes he's on his way up. For once, he came to Parliament to announce economic growth figures that were better than forecast.
The Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Today, he wanted to get some political credit for that, while reminding voters that there's a long climb still ahead.
Britain's economic plan is working. But the job is not done. We need to secure the economy for the long term. And the biggest risk to that comes from those who would abandon the plan.
Because most of the announcements in the autumn statement were leaked beforehand, the document that was actually centre stage today was the Office for Budget Responsibility's economic forecasts. And because they're forecasting better growth, that means borrowing down and tax revenues up. But the OBR are also suggesting that we might have the wrong kind of growth, a sort of economic equivalent of a sugar high, too based on consumer spending and a housing boom. From the photo opportunities, you might think he was rebuilding the country with his own hands. Today, George Osborne laid political traps for Labour, thinly disguised as economic rules, tighter spending caps and still more welfare cuts.
An improving economy does not let us off the hook for taking the difficult decisions to make sure the government lives within its means.
Labour drove its message home outside, a cost of living bombshell to max the tax bombshell the Tories used to deploy against Labour. Ed Miliband's temporary energy bill freeze has got the coalition pumping out its own cost of living measures. In the Commons, Labour mocked the £400 million the Chancellor splashed out, getting some levies off energy bills.
On energy bills, after their panicked and half-baked attempt to steal Labour's clothes. Mr. Speaker, we know they're not very good at shooting badgers. They're not very good at shooting other people's foxes either, Mr. Speaker.
Ed Balls said the Chancellor was in denial about people's standard of living. The Office for Budget Responsibility suggests things could start getting better on that front from next year, though no one should expect anything amazing soon.
Well, look, we've had the deepest recession in 100 years, and we've had the slowest recovery from that in 100 years. It's not surprising that households are worse off. Recession means that there's less national income to go around, so households are worse off than they were back in 2010. We might just about begin to see household incomes start to rise over the next couple of years if we're lucky, but they're still going to be worse off than they were back in 2010.
There's some bits in here that inevitably stick in your throat, don't they?
No, I think there are some warnings about things that could go wrong. And, the housing market is currently, very buoyant, could, inflate seriously, and there are warnings about that. That's why it's so important that we increase housing supply, and that is beginning to happen, but it's going to happen on a much bigger scale.
Measures like the married person's allowance and free school meals might just make you think that Christmas is coming. So the Chancellor talked about raising the pension age and tougher action on the deficit, as he wants voters to see this as a job that's going well but is not yet finished. Gary Gibbon, Channel 4 News, Westminster.